Howdy, and welcome to the Aggie Teach Momentum podcast, brought to you by the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences program at Texas A&M University. I am your host, Kenrick Davies, former high school physics and astronomy teacher and current program manager for Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences. This podcast is meant to provide a little more insight and information to those seeking a secondary content teacher certification in Texas. We aim to provide episodes that help pre-service educators on the path to certification, as well as leverage the experience of myself and other guest speakers to support teachers in their first few years in the classroom. And today's topic is a really exciting one, the one I've been wanting to do for a while, and it's about the idea of teaching using inquiry. So inquiry in the classroom. This is actually going to be a series of episodes, and this being our first one is going to be the inquiry in the science classroom. Of course, I had to pick science because I was a science teacher. And in the studio, we have a special guest, Dr. Dawson Nodurft, who's an Instructional Associate Professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy here at Texas A&M University. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, and I know you've interacted with Aggie Teach a couple of different ways this semester, and so I really appreciate your support of the program and the support of our physics teachers that are going out in the field. But why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself? What got you into education? What got you here at A&M? And what do you enjoy most about it?
So there's a lot of answers to that. So I'll just start with how did I get into physics? How did I get into science?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that really started with my undergraduate class. I went into my first class at my undergraduate at Lake Forest College in Illinois, and I had this wonderful instructor, Dr. Michael Cash, and the first day he came out with a lightsaber and said, "I'm here to teach you about the Force," and me being a little nerd and loving Star Wars was immediately hooked on this person's lectures and his demonstrations, and so what started as I'm just going to maybe do this as a minor turned into this being a major.
Nice.
I then started to do research with him during my senior year, which then proceeded to me thinking maybe I'll go to graduate school. I applied to Texas A&M in part because of his previous research here. He went here during sabbaticals several times, and so he had a prior established relationship with A&M. So he encouraged me to apply because they had a very good optics program, so I did. Thankfully, I got accepted. I was accepted to a few other programs, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
A&M, though, was my top choice, but what made the decision for me to come here very clear and final was when I came for my graduate student open house, and that happened on the same weekend as the annual Physics and Engineering Festival.
Yes.
And so that event was eye-opening. It made me want to be here. I was so excited and surprised to see so many faculty, students, graduate students and undergraduate students showing off physics to the general public and showing their passion for it. And I just said, I want to be here. So I signed the dotted line and I showed up, came as a graduate student in 2011, graduated from here in 2019 with my PhD, and pretty much immediately got into the classroom and started teaching. I talked with a couple of people and said, I want to teach. Mm-hmm. And eventually I applied and got the job in January 2020. And here we are.
Nice. So I remember when I was a student here, before 2010, that the Physics and Engineering Festival was a big deal. It wasn't as big as what it is now, so I'm really glad that it's gotten to be a really awesome event, and that helps really showcase the love that people have for physics and why other people should enjoy it too. So you got into the classroom. What do you enjoy most about being in the classroom?
It's really simple, and I feel like this is a lot of what instructors will tell you, but it's the interactions with the students. It's getting to share my passion about the material with someone else. It's getting to be my own Dr. Michael Cash. You know, nice. I just every day I wake up and I see things, just blue sky, and I just like why is the sky blue? Those little things that you can see as you understand physics. Even though you might say it takes away the mystery, it just makes it more exciting. And we can understand these things. We can explain them to others. We can use it to predict other phenomena. And so that whole process, along with getting students to develop their own ways of understanding the material, and so that way they can share that with others. That's what really drives me. I
love it. I mean, I see a lot of myself. I know you got into the classroom, I think, a little bit, about the same time that I did, maybe. And I love that aspect of physics too, and the physics teaching, right? It's a lot about getting the students to enjoy it, but it's also about sharing the passion that you have for it, and that's what teaching is. I love it. Okay, so our topic here is about a specific way of teaching, one that I really do feel like lends itself to science a little bit, maybe more than the other concepts, which is why I like starting this series with science. But that is the idea of inquiry-based learning. So inquiry-based learning, what does it mean to you, and what does it look like in your classes?
So inquiry-based learning to me, and I think it just goes from the definition of inquiry, it's having a question and then trying to answer that question. So it starts off with, here is something that we see in front of us. How does this work? Why does it work? So, you bring a demonstration to class. It can be a simple thing. It doesn't have to be some, very extravagant demonstration. But like, why does this block slide down the hill? Everyone immediately starts to say gravity. But okay, we have an explanation for why it moves down. But then that also leads to another question. How long does it take? What's its speed when it gets to the bottom? So what's its acceleration during the entire process? So a single question then leads to more questions. So our goal is to develop models that can predict behavior and predict behavior accurately within a certain amount of uncertainty.
Right. Yeah, I remember learning whenever I was going through teacher preparation here through Aggie Teach was the idea of discrepant events. And I don't know if they're still called that anymore, but when you do a demonstration where something you're not expecting happens, so it appears to roll up the hill rather than down the hill, or it actually gets caught while the car is moving at a constant speed, right? So how many of those types of demonstrations do you like to use?
Every time you have an opportunity to do something that's non-intuitive, that people are going to guess the wrong thing, it makes people more excited to see and really understand it. The counterintuitive nature of certain things drives more inquiry. And so that's just part of being in science is really just getting something in front of you that you want to explain. And so you have to start learning how to ask questions. And when you learn how to ask questions, you also need to learn how to answer them. And that's where I think it's important for professors and students to have a discussion which leads to feedback. So developing critical thinking. So in our courses, we teach hundreds of students. And no matter the number of students, we still have to teach them how to critically analyze certain situations. And so we stress critical thinking throughout our entire process of learning. Now, we start with the fundamental law. We discuss how to apply the fundamental law, and from there we then show how to go from the fundamental law to a set of equations if necessary to solve, whether that's using calculus or otherwise, depends upon the problem. But overall, this critical thinking, this question and then critical thinking and then feedback, because clearly, everyone's going to have certain, mistakes, misconceptions that they bring up along the way. Giving them that feedback to then reformat and reformulate their thinking leads them to have the fundamental skills that they need for their future careers and their majors. It's also then needs to be assessed. This is where we come in with our common exams across our courses. Give the exams, we grade them the night of the exam, and then we return them the next day of class while the questions are still fresh in the students' minds, so that way they can get that feedback while it's still meaningful. It's our opinion that if you wait too long to get that information back, they've moved on.
Right.
And when you've moved on, you might be able to go back and look at it again and figure out what you were mistaken. But while it's still fresh, it's much easier to take that feedback in and then apply it, because the next day we're already getting into new material.
Right.
And a lot of science, as you know, in physics, it builds upon itself. So you have to set the foundation, and then we're building on top of that foundation one brick at a time. So giving them the feedback to say, okay, this is what you did really well. This is maybe where you had some error. That leads them to have a more successful experience with the next set of material.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of educational research out there that says prompt feedback is really the only way to give feedback for it to be meaningful and effective in the classroom, right? So there's a ton of what I loved about what you were talking about in terms of increasing students' proficiency with the ideas of inquiry, helping them understand how to answer a question when something's in front of them and it doesn't necessarily go the way that they thought it was going to go. How do they dive into it in a scientific way, right, in a methodical way to be able to answer the question? So what caused you to make the decision to teach your classes using inquiry as opposed to something a little bit more, I guess, normal, like direct teaching or lecturing?
Well, I would certainly say no matter what, as I said before, science is inquiry. So you, at least from my perspective, I can't speak for everyone, I want to show something and then ask a question and then start to build off of that question. Now, I do think, though, that direct lecture or direct instruction has its place because there needs to be certain sets of understandings of basic concepts to build upon. So it's great to ask a question, but then I still think that students do need some information from an instructor that is really well cultivated and explained for them to then build their questions off of and then start to process information from.
Right. I mean, if they are trying to tackle the question in front of them, but don't necessarily have the requisite skills to be able to go very far, right? It's at some point the teacher's going to have to step in and say, okay, well, let's learn about this topic to maybe help us understand how to answer this question.
Certainly, yeah.
When it comes to inquiry, right, if you're allowing them to, one, ask their own questions, or even if you have the question in front of them and allowing them to sort of go their own direction in solving it, that can develop into kind of a mess, right? I mean, they could sometimes go the wrong direction. They can sometimes go down a rabbit trail that it leads them nowhere. So how do you handle that when their pathways take unexpected directions, especially when you need them to learn certain things from the experience?
Yeah, really, and I know sometimes students get frustrated by this, but I ask a question.
Yeah.
I ask a probing question, trying to direct them to the point where I think their misconception lies, where they might have gone down a wrong track. So usually, I shouldn't say usually, but many times there is some portion of a law, and I'll just use this example because it's what I've been teaching this semester, so it's fresh in my mind. Gauss's law for electricity. Mm-hmm. So we use Gauss's law for electricity to find the electric fields from static charge distributions. Mm-hmm. But there are certain underlying assumptions you need to have about the charge distribution for you to go ahead and use that law. So occasionally, a student will try to apply the law in areas that it doesn't work.
Okay.
And so I then ask the question, does this, charge distribution have a significant amount of symmetry? What are the two assumptions for Gauss's law? And so by trying to probe them and say, okay, well, the electric field must be parallel to the surface area vector over the Gaussian surface, and it must be constant in magnitude over the Gaussian surface. By getting them to understand those two assumptions, we then attack the problem and say, does this situation actually hold to those two assumptions? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, then we can't use the law. We have to use another approach.
So that's really the power of a teacher, right? I mean, if you see a student kind of going off the deep end or going in the wrong direction, right, you have the ability to redirect without telling them the answer, giving them the ability to figure it out themselves, which is sort of like inherently what inquiry is about, right?
Yeah, and I also think that when you respond to their, mistakes or misconceptions with a question, you are demonstrating the skills that you need to have to be a scientist or an engineer. You are showing them that, hey, what you should always be thinking about are questions. And really, if you are, as you become more proficient, you learn to answer those questions yourself. And so even if, 3 years from now, maybe you don't remember everything that you learned from in my course, I wouldn't expect you to.
Right.
But if you learn how to ask a good question, a leading question to yourself, which you can then look up the information from and then move forward from, that is more impactful than just rote memorization of this is the law. And the law helps, but really we want to be able to say what is this situation, what is happening in this situation, what are these assumptions that we're applying, really getting down to good questions, responding with answers coming from documented sources, journal articles, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm thinking through a student's ability to do this, right? I mean, they probably come to your class not having experienced this to a great degree. Hopefully they experienced it a little bit in high school. So how do you build up a student's proficiency with this skill? Is it just like an everyday you're doing this and it's consistency? In which case, if they are failing, how do you build up their sort of proficiency with handling failure?
Well, I think the first thing about handling failure and is basically showing them that failure is expected. I honestly open up my classes every semester with the statement, something to the effect of, I expect you to fail. I expect you to fail every day. You fail to succeed. It's just like any sport. You have to practice a lot, and you should expect that you're not going to hit all your shots. But as you become more, as you spend more time with the material, as you move forward with it, you will get better at being more and more accurate over time. it really is just practice makes perfect, and to not allow the frustration to set in as a I'm just not good enough, because that is a fixed mindset. You want to say like, okay, I don't know this right now, but if I put in the time, I can certainly grow and get there. And so I think that also needs to be demonstrated in the instructor in the room. I will very frequently make mistakes on the board, or I will say something, and then a student will point it out to me, and that's amazing. And then I thank them for that, and I say, "You're right." I try to I don't try to hide my mistake. I try to show that we all make mistakes. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. I make mistakes still. I say things incorrectly. So by modeling that it's okay to make a mistake, but we don't just stop at the mistake and say, "Okay, well, I'm not going to figure it out." We move forward from that and really try to assess, okay, what did I say wrong? Where was my mistake? What is the correct actual statement here? So being careful with the terminology, being very rigorous with your definitions of your words, and just showing and just demonstrating that, mistakes happen. Everyone's going to make a mistake. We can move forward from it. I also like to, in my class, anytime they catch a mistake, to really encourage them to catch me with my mistakes and question me when they think I've said something wrong. If they catch me with a mistake, the next day's class, I bring a set of plastic balls to class. So, like, the proverbial tomatoes being thrown at at somebody, they get to throw plastic balls at me the next day as my penance for making a mistake in front of them.
Sitting here listening to your answers, I'm reflecting on a couple of things. One, I really think that's a critical skill for teachers to be able to admit when they're wrong, right? I mean, you certainly don't want to be up in the front of the classroom as the wise one who never gets anything wrong and coming off that way to your students, right? That's just not a great way to be in the classroom. The other thing that hit me was, as you're talking about using inquiry in the classroom, you're almost talking about life skills, right? I mean, you're talking about asking good questions, finding out answers on your own, being able to handle failure. And I almost think that this is going to be sort of a common theme across all of our content areas, is that the use of inquiry is not necessarily about the content, but it's about how do we figure things out. Mm-hmm. And that kind of leads me into the next question, because figuring things out is exactly what science is all about, right? I think there's a big misconception around science being a host of facts and figures in a textbook. So can you talk about how your students have really engaged with science or have learned about the processes of science through inquiry-based learning in your classes?
So I actually think that there is a really wonderful program that is officially a course that I teach that isn't my standard introductory-based physics classes, that really utilizes this approach and really gets students to learn things themselves based on inquiry, and that is our Discover, Explore, and Enjoy Physics and Engineering program. Nice. So it's essentially a 0 credit hour course that students sign up for, and what we do is we get a group of students together with a graduate student mentor. So we get them into individual teams, and they work at building, designing, fabricating, and explaining physics demonstrations that are shown at our festivals and that we even use in our classrooms. Cool. When I was a graduate student here, I also ran a deep group. And so we built, I think, like 15 demos over the course of a few years. And it was really a wonderful program. And so, at the crux of this program is this inquiry approach where we say, okay, we want to build this. Mm-hmm. We want to show this. And so we have, at least the way that I ran my group, I shouldn't speak for all deep groups, but the way that I ran my group was, okay, I would like to show this physical principle or this law, this concept, and I would kind of come with them with a general idea of how I thought we could accomplish that. Mm-hmm. But then I would send them off and say, okay, I want you to spend a little bit of time. I want you to research this self. I want you to come up with your own ideas. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to discuss it. After we did that process, we then got into the fabrication phase. And usually what happens is we run into problems. Mm-hmm. And I thought that it would be very easy regularly for me to give answers and just say, oh, well, we obviously need to do this. But I would try to hold off and step back and say, look, I have my own idea. So if you get stuck and you really don't know where to go, I'll give you some thoughts. But I really want you to try to determine something yourself. Mm-hmm. spend some time, look up journal articles, do some research, watch a YouTube video if you can find somebody else who's done a similar project before, see what they've done. Try to develop your own solution to this problem. And so their own questions lead to them finding their own answers, and most of the time they ended up not coming back to me with something. They would just say, "Here's what we're going to do,"
Nice.
and those projects we still use. The one demonstration that we built that is probably one of my favorites was the supersonic ping pong cannon, and not a single component of that was designed by me. The students came up with the converging diverging nozzle for that led from the pressurized air chamber to the evacuated PVC pipe, which the ping pong ball was in. So they used essentially principles that are related to jet engines to try to speed up the ball as was accelerated down the tube. So their own inquiry helps them when they get into their own majors and their careers, because it teaches them that there's not always going to be an answer that's just going to be available for you. Sometimes you have to come up with something yourself.
Yep. And
the way that you get proficient in developing an answer yourself starts with, okay, what do I want? What do I need to do? What's going on here? Just asking questions to try, and then trying to find answers to those questions.
And I think that's really important to understand that students have some great ideas, and sometimes those ideas don't necessarily match up with what we think is going to happen, and the use of inquiry allows them to really go down the hole on their own idea, and sometimes they come up with some really amazing things. I've seen some really amazing things in the classroom based off of what the student wanted to do, not what I wanted the student to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just something for us as teachers to recognize that they can do amazing things if you give them the opportunity and space to do it.
Yeah, it's actually, I don't know why I didn't think about this earlier, but it is certainly true that as I've taught these courses, my lecture courses, students have regularly come up with other ways to explain something that I didn't think of, and I thought it was so much better than the way that I explained it that I have taken it and used it ever since. And I tell my students when I've used another student's idea to explain something, because I want them to know that, hey, there are sometimes things that you're going to do that I haven't thought of that are better than what I put together. So there's mnemonics that they've come up with. There's certain approaches to solving problems which I thought were stronger, at least in terms of the applying the concept, than maybe what I had presented to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they definitely will take things from you and then build upon it, and a lot of times will make it better than what you gave.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it, and I've experienced that myself, taking ideas from people. I used to have a 3D printer in my classroom, and one of the ideas that I came up with for use of the 3D printer was to give it to the students, essentially, and say, make one of my labs better. If there's something that you can design and print that would make one of our labs better, I am all for it. And so some of the things that they came up with were just phenomenal. So if a teacher's listening here and they are thinking, okay, I want to start using inquiry in the classroom, do you have any suggestions about where they might be able to start?
Yeah, so I think what I would suggest is, what questions would you ask yourself?
Mm.
So you're a professional in your field. You know the things that you struggled with. You know the things that you had to spend a lot of time thinking about, and a lot of what I teach and the way that I use questions in the classroom to drive discussion and drive the understanding of the material comes up from the same things that I was asking myself, when I was first started learning it. So it can be hard, but to remember that far back, depending upon how long it's been. But it's really just thinking, okay, what were the things that I didn't quite understand, and trying to present those same questions to the class, and then having them ask and answer questions based on that. Mm-hmm. So the likelihood is they are also going to have similar questions to the ones that you had previously. And that's just a natural way to kind of, I think, get into inquiry without, and just make it natural, not something that, feels forced.
Yeah, I think another way to look at this, at least for me, was to think about the things that amazed you about the subject that you fell in love with, or the subject that you may be teaching about, and ask that question: why is the sky blue? Why do we have airbags? In a car.
Yeah.
So asking about those things that you felt really, really engaged with when you first learned about it is also a great place to start, in my opinion.
Oh, certainly. I mean, I do the same thing in my class. I was trying to answer just based on like a more general listener, but yes, like certainly for like if you're doing science, I would hope that you have a certain level of a wonder about the things in the world that you were passionate about and excited to learn about, that you can press forward as a question to everyone else.
All right, so we're getting close to the end of our time. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about where people might be able to find you online, because I know you do other social media stuff for A&M and for the physics department. So if listeners want to learn more about you and your approach, or just the work that you do here, where can they find you online?
So there are our social media videos, which you mentioned. Those you can find us on YouTube, Instagram. That's the. I actually think we're also on LinkedIn now that I think about it. You can find them there. But that's the TAMU Physics and Astronomy pages on those social media platforms. Those are where we show off our demonstrations, and we do that in a short format. So we're trying to show it in a very, very quick 1.5 minutes, some sort of physical law, and explain it very quickly. We don't necessarily get into too much depth about it, but we try to just drive interest and show that the world is beautiful and interesting, and there's fun things about science you can find anywhere. If you're interested in more things related to the classroom, we have our course resources, which can be found on classroom.physics.tamu.edu. On this website, you can find chapter outline videos for the textbook that we use, the Don't Panic series by Dr. William Bassakis. There are conceptual videos in which Dr. Bassakis essentially gives a 3 to 5 minute explanation of the law, and then does a few small examples of law. And then there's deeper problem-solving videos where Dr. Tatiana, in what we are called the recitation videos, does a 12 to sometimes 20-minute, fully worked-out solution of problems. So those are things that you can use to see kind of what our classrooms are like, or what my classroom is like. We also have our old exams on there, which are highly popular for students taking the class. The one there's also a page on OER Texas, supplemental physics. So those are open education resources that myself, Dr. Tatiana Yurikimova, Dr. William Bassakis, Dr. Jeremy Holt, and Dr. Reiner Fries put together, along with working with some graduate students and undergraduate students, that anyone across the country, but was developed with a grant for Texas. So if you would like to grab videos related to lecture demonstrations that you can use in your own classroom, those are available. There are fully worked out problems that you can steal for your own class, or you can give to your class. We have those without the answers. So there's a bunch of resources on the OER Texas page. Lastly, and since I mentioned this before, I'm going to plug it one more time. The DEEP program on YouTube, there is the TAMU Physics and Astronomy DEEP page, where you can actually see recorded videos that our students, along with their DEEP graduate student mentors, have made to explain the demonstrations that they spend all year working on.
Nice.
And those demonstrations, those videos are something that have become even really more and more important as just institutional memory. So we can show them off to people who are maybe coming in for the first time, and they're doing a demo that was built by our students. So the students can explain themselves what's going on, and their legacy is left here forever, because they are then impacting new graduate students and new undergraduate students who are going to be trying to explain these demonstrations to the general public.
That's great, and this is a great way to get the students involved with inquiry and showing how great it is to share their love of the subject areas. That's really, really awesome. And that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you, Dr. Nodurft, for being a guest today. The Aggie Teach Momentum podcast drops every 2 weeks, so make sure that you are looking for the next episode on Spotify or linked on the Aggie Teach Arts and Sciences website. For more information, you can visit our program website at aggieteachartsci.tamu.edu. That is aggieteach, ARTSCI.tamu.edu. Thanks and gig 'em.